Hi, my name is Robin Aber, and I am presenting an introduction to Photoshop for beginners. I produce a YouTube channel that's called at Photomaker Academy, where I post educational content related to Photoshop and how to use Photoshop to produce fine art photography. So there's a variety of tutorials on various topics of how to use different tools, features, and capabilities in Photoshop at my YouTube channel. So you might want to check that out. And if you'd like to be alerted to new content that I post, typically 1 to 2 times per month, then please feel free to subscribe under the videos at this URL. They have a subscription button, and if you subscribe, it's free. There's no charge for it, and I don't send out any emails or marketing or spam or things like that. So if you subscribe, it just means that YouTube will send you one alert when I do post new content. So let me get started. What I was going to be doing in this tutorial today is provide an overview to the interface that is Photoshop and how to use some of the most essential tools in Photoshop just to get started using it. So let me start with an interface tour for Photoshop. And what I wanted to start with is on the left and work my way over to the right. So here over on the left-hand side in this area here is the Tools panel, or sometimes it's just generally referred to as the toolbar. And this is where you'll find all the tools that you need for processing images in Photoshop. And if you hover over any one of these, it will pop up and tell you the name of the tool. So this is the Move tool, this is the Lasso tool, the Crop tool, the Spot Healing Brush, the Healing Brush tool, the patch tool. So as you hover over each of them, you'll get the name for the tool. And typically what they have in there is also a little letter in parentheses after the name of the tool. And that's just a keyboard shortcut. So if you get to the point where you don't want to have to come all the way over and click on these tools, you can use that keyboard shortcut instead just to activate the tool. Now, you'll also notice, if you look closely, that some of these tools have these little arrowheads pointing down to the right, not all of them. But what that tells you is if there's a little arrowhead like that, it means there are some hidden tools that have similar functionalities and features to the tools that are there. And they group them together, but there's just too many to have them all visible. So if you right-click on that little arrowhead there, you can see that in addition, grouped under the lasso tool is also a polygonal lasso tool and a magnetic lasso tool. So for any of these hidden tools, if you just left, when you can see there's a little blue highlight over it, so if you just left click on that, it'll change and become the active tool. So if you want to work on one, all you have to do is right click on that little arrowhead, get this pop-out menu, come to the tool you want to work with, and then just left click, and then that will be the active tool. And you can also note here, as I click on a tool, watch, you get the dark black, so you can always look over and see which tool is active by which one has the dark background behind it. Here's the brush tool, and behind the brush tool is a pencil tool. Okay, so you can explore those at your leisure as you try to work through Photoshop. I believe there might be, but I turned it off after I got familiar with Photoshop, that you can also, in addition to just having these pop-up names for the tools, I think there's also an option in the preferences, so edit menu, preferences, to be able to set it up so you get a bigger explanation of how the tool works. So maybe when you're first getting started, you might want to either do a Google search or a web search and find out how to get the full tool descriptions that will pop out just to help you until you get oriented, and then you might want something a little less obtrusive that way. So below all of these different tools is a zoom tool. It looks like a little magnifying glass if you want to zoom in or zoom out on an image, you can use that tool and then just click on the image. And then below that is these black and white squares, and that's called the color picker. The square that's black right now and up higher and to the left is the foreground color. There you go. And this is the background color. The white one now is the background color, so it's below and behind, so it's in the background. And that is something, the color picker is something that you can use to select the specific colors that you want to work with in Photoshop. If you ever want to switch the background color to the foreground, you just use this little double-headed arrow and just click on that, and that will swap your foreground and your background colors. So that's the quick orientation, just to get a feel for what's where. I'll show you how to work with some of these a little bit later as we get some examples. Next in our tour of the interface is this area right here just above the document panel or the document window. This is the document window right here. And this is called the options bar. So for each of these tools in the tool panel, they have their own options that you can set associated with them. So if you'll watch up here in this options bar, right as I click on some of these different tools, you'll see that the options for the different tools change. So there's this one. See, you can see there's different tools options coming up that you can set the different amounts and percents and how they apply and all those good things. So that's just good to be familiar with the fact that you can set different options associated with different tools as you progress if you want to. You don't have to. Okay, above the options bar is the menu bar. That's up here where it says File, Edit, Image, Layer. Those are all part of the menu bar. And the menu bar has different commands and adjustments and panel features that you can use. So for instance, if we come to the File menu, this is where you open have different options for opening documents or creating new documents in Photoshop. This is where you close and save. And this is where you can grab images from other places like Adobe Stock. The Automate menu is a little bit different if you come down to that feature under the File menu, because here if we come all the way down to the bottom, so for these ones with the arrowheads to the right, you would just pull over and then it expands and you get even more menu options. But I just wanted to point out Automate because down here there's an option to create HDRs, and so if you have multiple bracketed shots, you can create HDRs. And the photo merge down here at the very bottom under File and then Automate photo merge is just another term for panorama. So if you have a bunch of images that you took in a series and want to stitch them together, this is the tool that you would use for that. Okay. In the Edit menu, we have things like cutting, copying, filling, transforming, scaling, things like that nature are under the Edit menu. So all things that you would use to sort of make changes to the appearance of your image. Under the Image menu is things such as mode. So I think it's good for you to be familiar with the mode capability or the mode features under Image. And again, let's go to the flyout because sometimes certain features in Photoshop only work if your image is in RGB mode. So this is where you would check to be sure that it's RGB. But you can see if your image is a grayscale and RGB, you can also see the bit depth of the image that you're working with under mode. And then you also have some auto features. So if you want to, actually Photoshop is very good usually with their auto tools. So if you want to try auto toning your image or applying auto contrast or auto color, you might want to try these and see how they work for you. This also tells you how big your image is, or if you want to duplicate your image to work on a backup copy. Layer lets you create new layers, rename layers, or do special, add special conditions to the layers that you're working with. Type is for working with typeface. So if you want to type text onto a layer of your image, then you would be working with the type layer. And here again, you can preview the font size. You can convert your layers. You can assess and match a piece of text to find out what font it is, things like that. Under select, so select is just another name for choose. So if you want to choose aspects of your image that you're working with and do something to them selectively, then you would work with the capabilities from the select menu. So you might be able to select something based on its color. You might be able to select a subject. So if you look at her, she's a subject. You could use that for that. If you want to select a sky and modify a sky, then you can work with that. So select just lets you choose parts of an image and work with that image. The filter menu has all sorts of creative features and capabilities that you can add to your images. So we have all these different galleries of capabilities. So for instance, under the blur gallery, let me just look at blur instead. Under blur, we have Gaussian blur, motion blur, shape blur, things like that. You could add noise to an image. You can add texture to an image, and then if you own any third-party plugins, I own quite a few, then they would show up down below in this area here. So these are all the creative filters that you can apply to your images. 3D I'm going to skip over because Adobe is actually phasing out 3D. View lets you see what your image looks like and get information about it, particularly if you're going to be printing your image. This has the features to let you proof how it's going to look and proof the colors depending on the kind of paper you're going to be printing on, things like that. So that's what View is good for. Plugins is primarily Adobe related plugins, so that's different than the filter, so I'll just skip over that. Window lets you choose the workspace that you want to work with. So right now, if you come down to workspace and go out to this flyout menu, we are looking at the default photography workspace. But if you want to customize your workspace, you can move these different areas that I'm pointing around here around, and then all you'd have to do is you can create a custom workspace. So like under new workspace, you'd move the things around and then you'd give it a name and you save it. So I actually have custom workspaces that I usually work with. Okay. And if you want to open more panels besides the panels that are over here on the right, you would do that under Windows. So all you would have to do is click on one of these different categories and then you'd open up a new panel. Okay, so just be aware that Windows, open Windows or panels. And if you need some more help, there's always the help menu. So you can search for Photoshop help under here. And About Photoshop will tell you which version you're on. This will tell you what's new. Okay. And if you go to here, it'll tell you if there are updates. One of the things that all right, so as we continue around, so this is, sorry, I'm getting distracted because there's so many wonderful things. So this area where you'll do your work with your images is considered the document window. So that's what shows the files that you're working on. And just be aware that you can have multiple files open at the same time. I only have one open now, but you can stack them around and do different things with them, so you can work on them all at the same time. As we continue around to the right, these are two of the panels that I mentioned can be launched from the Windows menu. So on the top are the properties and on the bottom are the layers. And then we also have some others. So history will tell you all the different things that you've done, and it keeps track of the different things that you've done. So if you want to go back in your history and redo something or undo something, you can. Channels just shows you the red, green, and blue and what's happening in each of the individual red, green, and blue. channels. So layers is where you'll do the bulk of your work, and the way layers work is that they stack from the bottom up. As you add them, they get added to the top, and they let you progressively add content or make modifications or adjustments to the content that you're working with. For each of your adjustments, just like the tools had their own options, each of the different adjustments that you can make with things like solid colors, brightness, contrast levels, curves, vibrance, saturation, black and white, each of these different adjustments that you can use over here in the layers panel has its own specific properties associated with it that you can change to suit your taste or not. So you don't have to. So anyway, I think the bottom line is there's tools. They have features that you can adjust or not. There are menus that give you access to different features and capabilities. You'll have all of your images that you're working with in this area here. You'll do any of your work where you're performing the manipulations will be done in your layer panel, and you'll see what happens to them in this display area here. And if you want to make any specific adjustments to your image, then you'll get features in this area here that you can use to adjust any of those capabilities. All right, so I think that's just kind of the general layout of how Photoshop is laid out. The next thing I wanted to show you is that you can set the preferences that you want when working with Photoshop. And there's a really huge list of them, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but I thought there might be a few critical ones that might be good for you to set right up front if you're just getting started and haven't used Photoshop yet before you get too far into it. So if we go to the Edit menu, so this is up in the menu bar, click on Edit and open this up and come all the way down to the bottom to where we see Preferences, and we come to this flyout menu here. And the first one I want to show you is Interface. Okay, so these are all the different categories of preferences that you can set, and any one of these that you click on, there's going to be a whole page that pops up of different things that you can set. So that's what I'm saying. It may be overwhelming if you're just getting started, but just be aware you might want to look at it, see what the options are, and just be aware that they're there. But I'm going to show you three that you can at least use to get started. So Interface is the first one. Okay, so when you click on one of those preference categories, and they'll still all appear over here again too, and we're on Interface right now, you have a choice of how this interface appears that you can set to your taste. I have mine set, as you can see, to the dark gray. There's a little blue line around it, and any highlights I make, they're going to be a blue color. So if you prefer like a black or a lighter gray or a white, this is where you would click on any one of those and make the change. I'm not going to do it because I don't want to do it right now, but you can change your interface color to whichever background color you prefer, and you can change your highlight color if you want to as well. And when you do that, then you can hit OK, but I'm not going to hit OK until I show you the other options. And just be aware that after you do get your preferences set and click OK to accept them, the preferences will not take effect until the next time you open Photoshop. So you're going to have to close and then reopen Photoshop in order for the new preferences to take effect. All right, the next preference I wanted to show you, so Interface is the first one if you want to change the color theme. The next one, let's see here, file handling. So let me show you file handling. Okay, so you can choose things like where you want to save your documents. I have mine set to always save as to the original folder. I don't want them appearing on my desktop or someplace else. So for me, that is important to be able to save where I want my files and my documents to save. The other thing that I think is important to note here and not get caught up in everything if it's too much and too overwhelming, is I have it clicked so that I am saving in the background. So as I'm working, there are saves taking place. And I also have it clicked on that Photoshop should automatically save and recover information every 5 minutes. So you can determine how often you want to do it, but I have it doing it frequently, because if you're in the middle of working on a project and you haven't thought to just save yourself, you want it backing up for you, because if Photoshop crashes and something goes wrong and you just quickly relaunch the program, probably a good portion of what you had been working on will be saved if you have this clicked on and you're having it saved frequently. The other preference that I wanted to show you is, da, 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 da. Do I have it here? Huh. Oh, okay, so it's not, sorry, it's a preference, but it's not in the list of preferences. So let me cancel out of this. So under the Edit menu, under, where is it? Color settings, here we go. So on the Edit menu, come down to Color Settings and click on that. I have my color space, or my working space, set to Adobe RGB 1998 because I capture in that working space, or that color space, in my camera. So I like to have Photoshop stay in a consistent color space. But if you're mostly going to be posting to the web, and if you're capturing your images in sRGB, you can set yours to be on sRGB. Okay, that's one of the options that you have. And whenever you update Photoshop, that's why I'm showing you where this is. Whenever you update Photoshop, they always set it back to the default of sRGB. So one of the first things I do after I update Photoshop is I come back to this Edit color settings and I make sure that it is set on or set back to Adobe RGB for my use. So you should probably do the same and make sure that it's set to whichever color space you prefer. So again, I'm going to cancel out of that because I don't want to change my color space. So I hope that was clear. Okay, so the next thing I want to show you is, and let me close this out. So if you want to close a document like this, there's different ways you can do it. You can just click on the X right here, or you can go to File and Close. File menu, Close. And Save Changes. No, I don't want to save changes to this. Okay, so now your workspace document window is empty, and we can start opening or closing, opening or creating new documents. So the first thing I wanted to show you how to do is how to create a new blank document. So if you just want to paint or create something artistic that way, or have a blank background that you want to put other things onto, you would come up to the File menu, click on that, and come down to New and click on that. So what will pop up is this panel that lets you create a new blank document. It's like a blank canvas essentially. So you can choose the options that you want. You can name the document that you're going to create. You can choose a document type that you want to. So you can click on this little down arrow and say, oh, okay, I want to do something that will be for a photo, or I want to do something for the web, or I just want to use a typical US paper size. So I don't know, let's say for now just use a photo size. And a size comes up for landscape 3x2. You can choose whether you want whatever sized landscape photo document size, or a portrait photo size. So if it's landscape, it's going to be horizontal. If it's portrait, it's going to be vertical. So I don't know, let's say we just pick a 5x7 landscape, and so that plugs in inches and height. Now you can also choose if you have to create something that fits into a specific pixel size. So sometimes when you enter photo contests, they say make sure that it has at least 2,000 pixels on the longest edge. And this is where you could do something like that. So you could come in and create a new document, and you can say I want it to be in pixels and not inches, and set 2,000 pixels, okay? And you can do something like that in there. Then you come down and you look and decide how much resolution. So 300 is a very good high resolution. So that's what I usually will work with. But if you want to do something for the web and you don't want people copying your stuff as easily as they can, you might want to lower the resolution. Here's that color space that I set up. So mine is set to RGB. Okay. And I like to keep mine on 16-bit. And then you can decide whether you want the background for this new document to be white, black, or some other color. All right. So once you get your parameters set up for a new document, you just click OK, and it pops up. And so we have this document, and if you click up in this top area, like adjacent to where the text is, you can just, with your cursor, just move this around in the workspace. So if you have more than one open, you can free up some real estate and move it around, okay? And I sometimes pull a corner like that just so I can see where the edges of the paper are more easily. Now, in opening up this brand new blank document, it has also given you a background layer in your layers panel. So that's your initial layer to start with. I never work on a background layer whether I'm working with an image or whether I'm creating new content like this lets you do. So to duplicate this and start working on a duplicate layer so you don't ruin what you're working with, you have, I'm going to just show you this simple way to do this. So this blue in here shows you that the background layer is active, and you would left click on that layer and drag it down to the bottom of the layers panel to this square icon next to the trash can that has a plus sign. That is the new layer icon. So just drag it and release. Okay, let me drag this to the trash can and get rid of it, and I'll show it again. So any layer that you want to duplicate, you make sure the layer is active by having the color highlight on it. Left click on it inside that layer, drag it down to the bottom of the layers panel, to the icon that has the square with the plus in it, which is the add new layer. And then once you're positioned over there, you just release and you've got a second layer. And once you have that layer, that's when you can do things like go to your tools. So let's click, for instance, on the brush tool. Okay, and right now we have a hard brush chosen, so it's in the hard brush category, and they're all brushes in different sizes, so that's what those pixel numbers mean there. And right now you can see on the hardness scale it's all the way at the top, so it's a hard brush. If we want to close that box, we just click over here in the options bar. Our opacity is set at 100%. So that means when you brush, you're going to get the full strength of whatever your foreground color is in your color picker. So let me just do that. So black is the foreground color. I'm going to make my brush a little bit bigger, and I'm doing that by clicking on the right bracket key on the keyboard. All right, so now I'm just going to left click with my brush tool active. Remember I said the dark shows which tool is active, and I'm just going to click, left click and drag. Okay. Oops. I forgot I had something else set here to show people. Okay, let's try that again. So full opacity, full flow. So here's 100% opacity. We just drag down, you can see that that's a full opacity. It's a solid black. If we lower the opacity, which we can do by clicking on this little down arrow and just dragging this arrow to the left, see, watch as I do it, the opacity percent is going down. And now if I drag down, you can see it's a lot lighter and less opaque, sorry, more transparent. If we come down here and lower it even more, you can see how transparent it is. So you can see how if you lower the transparency, you can paint over things and see what's below, so you can create some interesting effects doing that. If we put the opacity back to 100 and paint with the flow at a lower flow, so let me lower the flow now and paint. Now if I try to paint again, I'm painting over and over again. So let me do this to a really low flow so you can see it better what's happening. All right, there's a low flow. And as I paint over it more, you can build up color. So if you want to control how much color, and this is a hard brush, so that's why it's doing this weird as opposed to a smooth kind of a look. But if you lower the flow, then you can build color up gradually. So it's just good to know that the flow affects how much you can build up color. Smoothing, this got set to a really high number. I usually keep smoothing just down or under 10% or else it could slow down. So I'm just even going to leave it on 0 just so it doesn't slow things down. Okay, so that's the difference between opacity and flow and using the brush tool. And if we were to, remember I said you can use this arrowhead to flip your background color to your foreground color. So if we want to make this brush size smaller using the left bracket key and then paint with the white, there we go. So now the white is the foreground color because we made it, we flipped it with this. If we want to go back to the default, we can click on this little icon here, use the left bracket key, make this a little smaller. And so you can see how you can create different designs and do different things if you start with a brand new document like this. Okay, so that's what you would do if you were going to create a new document from scratch, and that would be again using with File menu and New, setting up the parameters, and then working with a brand new document. So I'm going to close that. So to close, we come up to the File menu again, and we just come down to close and left click on that, and you'll always get a prompt saying should Adobe save the changes that you made to this document, and in this case no. So I'll show you how to do a save if you want to save it. So in this case, no, we don't want to save this. So then the document is closed, and once you close it, if you have not saved it, it's gone forever. You can't retrieve it. It's gone. Okay. Now, since we're a photo club or we're a photographer working with Photoshop, we want to open some of our own images. Well, then we would still come back to the File menu again, and we'd come to Open. So not New this time because we're not creating a new blank image. We're going to open an already existing image. So File, Open. Left click on that, and then you'll get taken to someplace on your computer where you can open it. And I'm on a PC, so it may look different when you're on a Mac, so I'm sorry I can't tell you what you're going to see on a Mac, but File Open should still let you get to where you can open an image, and you would just have to know how to maneuver through your file system on a Mac. So if we're going to open an image, let me find an image that I can open. So I'm going to open this JPEG image of this woman. So I'm going to left click on there, and you can see it gets highlighted as the image I want to open. I'm going to come down here to the bottom right of the open command and left click, and now Photoshop has opened that image into the document window, or what I like to call the workspace. Okay, so now we can work on this image and be able to process it and do different things to it. So as I said before, I never like to work directly on my original image, which is represented by the background layer. So to be on the safe side, I highly recommend that you always duplicate your background layer and work on a duplicate. So again, we see that this layer is active. It's got the blue color in it. I'm going to left click inside that layer. I'm going to drag it down to the bottom of the layers panel to that icon that has the square with the plus in it, which is add layer, and then release. And now we have a copy of that layer. If you want to label it so you can keep track of what you're doing on each layer, you can double click where the words are. You'll see it gets highlighted, and then you can just type what you want. So I'm going to type woman with flowers. Okay, and then if you just quickly left click here, then it saves it as the label for that layer. All right, so just to show you, I'm going to create quickly a few layers on this just to show you how to save and things to think about when saving. So don't get too hung up on what I'm doing with the different things. So if I want to, let's say, add some more saturation to this, maybe this looks a little washed out to me. So what I want to do is add an adjustment that will give this image some more saturation. So in my layers panel, I come down to the bottom of the layers panel to this circle that has a line through it right here. So it's like the 1, 2, 3, 4, fourth icon from the left, or in the fourth icon from the right. So it's right in the middle. If you want to make adjustments, it's the circle with a line through it. And left click on that. And then these are the different adjustment capabilities that we can do in Photoshop, different adjustment layers. And I said I wanted to add some more saturation to this. So I'm going to scan up until I find this one is good for hue and saturation. So you make sure that it's highlighted with the color to say that it's an active choice, and left click. And now we've got a new hue saturation layer that's opened up and it's active. It's got the blue on it. And we have, as I said, each of those different adjustment layers has specific properties associated with it. So up here in the properties panel, these are the properties associated with the hue and saturation layer. We have the icon for hue and saturation, and if the icon is active, we have a white frame around it, and associated with that layer is a blank layer mask. It's a white layer mask. When a mask in Photoshop is white, that means it's showing all the content on the layer. So that's why we're seeing this entire image. If it's black, in Photoshop, black hides or conceals. So if we just quickly make this mask active, so there's a white frame around it to say it's active, and we hit invert, it becomes black, then we hide what we're doing. Okay, so masks can be black or white and have content on them. All right, so we said we wanted to increase the saturation for this layer. So the property associated with this, there's a slider for saturation. So if we click on that and pull it to the right, you can see that it's getting very saturated. Okay, and you can also decide how light or how dark it's going to be. Okay, now let's say, and if you double click on these, it'll take it back to 0. So double click on saturation, double click on that word lightness, it'll take it back to 0. Let's say I want to saturate the yellows. Okay, so I would come up to here to where it says master, because master will saturate all of the colors. Okay, I'll click on the down arrow, and actually maybe let me do the greens, it'll be more obvious. I'll click on the greens. So now Photoshop is only going to saturate the greens. And as I pull on that, you can see in the picture the greens are getting more saturated. If I choose what other color is in there, magenta, and then pull the saturation to the right, anything with magenta in it is going to get more saturated. If I pick the yellows, you can see the yellows are getting brighter. Okay, so why don't I, just for demonstration purposes, leave it on the yellows and make them a little bit brighter. Okay. All right, the next thing I think I'm going to do is, and again, you don't need to worry about how I'm going to do this, but I'm going to create a new, I'm going to go to this layer here, and I'm going to create use a selection tool, and I'm going to select her hair. So again, don't worry about this. I'm just trying to quickly create some layers to show you how the layers work and how you can save a document. Okay, so I'm just going to roughly select her hair like that. All right, and now if we go to the create another hue and saturation layer, so come down to the bottom of the layers panel to the circle with the line through it, click on there to see all the adjustment layers and come up to hue and saturation. Now, unlike before, where we got the whole image revealed to be able to adjust the saturation on the entire layer, this time we have an active mask that is only showing her hair. Because again, white shows or reveals in Photoshop and black hides. So if we if we make a saturation adjustment now or a hue adjustment now, all that's going to get adjusted is her hair because that's all that's white. So let's try it and see if it works. So we click on the icon, switch from the mask to the icon for hue and saturation, make sure that the white frame is around there, and let's just try changing the color of her hair and see if it changes. Yeah, so we're changing the color of her hair by dragging. The hue is the same, not just another word for color, okay? And so let's give her blue hair. And then if we want to increase the saturation of that blue hair, because it's only going to work on this one layer, it's only going to work on the active layer, it's not going to affect the unselected layer. All right, so let's make it more saturated and maybe a little bit brighter. Okay. All right, so now we have a few layers that we have created. We have the original layer, we have a backup layer just that we are going to be working on, and then we've done 2 adjustment layers to make modifications to the saturation. And if you click Alt or Option on the bottom little eye, so these eyes are Alt or None, that means you can see what's on the layer. If we turn them off, we're back to the original image. If we hold Alt or Option and click on the eyeball. If we turn any individual layer eye off, you can see or hide what you've done on that layer to see if it's what you want. Okay, so the eyes icons just give you visibility to what's on that layer. And you can turn them off if you change your mind and don't want that particular feature. Say, the blue hair is not so great. I maybe just want to work with the more saturated image. Okay, so the next thing I want to show you is after you've created some layers, and again, don't worry about all the things I did. I just wanted to walk quickly through to create some layers to show you how to save. So before you save, you need to decide, okay, have I finished work on this image? I mean, is this the way I want it to be forever and ever, or until I modify it again? So if you decide that you want to save an object and you're finished working with it for good, then what you can do is flatten the image. And to do that, you would come to your Layers panel and come over to this little hamburger menu and left click. And if you come down through the menus, you'll see something that says Flatten Image. And if you click on that, you will lose all these layers. They'll collapse, they'll flatten all down into one layer. But when they flatten, they will preserve the changes that you've made. So let me just include the blue here just so you can see that it's going to look different than the original. So if we come to our Layers panel, Hamburger menu, and Flatten, see, we have a single layer now, and it's incorporated all of the changes that we made in all our layers. And this is what you would do if you feel really content with your image and you want to save it. If you think that you want to do more with your image, then you wouldn't flatten it. So let me undo that there. I did a Control Z to undo. If you think, you know, I might want to, I don't know what else might we want to do here. I might want to come in and change this to a black and white. And yeah, that looks good to me. Okay, so if I think I might want to come in and make some modifications and maybe give it a sort of a vintage look, like a hand-painted look with the black and white, well then you want to retain the layers that you have. And so you do not want to flatten in that case. Okay, so just keep in mind what the different things that you want to do. So let's say you want to keep all these layers. So then what you would do is come up to the File menu, come down to Save As, because you don't want to save it just as it is, Save As. And what you would have to do is, I usually would modify this, so I wouldn't keep the same name. So I would put a modifier like here. So I would left click in there and I'd add something like with hand painting. This is just me. You can do what you want. You could put a number on it. You could put a date on it. I just label it so I know what I've done to the image. Okay? And then to keep these layers, we would use what's called a Photoshop file extension, a PSD. And that, using that Photoshop file extension and then hitting save will let you retain all these layers. So when you reopen this and want to make some more changes to this document, you don't have to start from scratch. It will appear just like this with all these layers. So I'm going to cancel because I don't want to save that right now. If you know for sure that this is exactly how you want this image to look and you're not going to make further modifications to it, that's when we do the flatten. So we go to our Layers panel, Hamburger menu, come down to Flatten. We've got a single layer. This is it. You're not, when you reopen it, this is all you would open. You're not going to get your layers again. You would come over to your File menu, come down to Save As again, and this time you have a choice. So you can either, if you're going to do something for the web, you probably want to save it as a JPEG. But if you're going to do more processing or you want to print it and you want a higher quality image, I typically save mine, so I would come down to Save As Type. For me, I'd click on this down arrow. I typically would use a TIFF for me, but because each time you do something with a JPEG, it sort of degrades the image a little bit. So the TIFF is less lossy. It'll retain more of the quality of your image. So you just decide for yourself whether you want to have an image that is more lossless, or if you want to use an image type that is a little more lossy and that you might be taking some pixels and some quality away from it each time you open it and do something to it. If you're not going to do anything with it again other than post it, JPEG would be perfectly fine. Okay, so I'm going to cancel again, but just wanted to show you the save as options in Photoshop. Okay, and then again, let's see how we're doing for time. If you want to close an image, then you come up to File and Close. And do I want to save? We've already saved the changes by doing the Save As. So at this point, I would say no for me. Okay. I'm working with a mouse right now, but I'd say that generally, if you work with a pressure sensitive tablet and a stylus, that this would be gives you more control, because working with a mouse is like working with a brick. If you're trying to do fine selections, it's going to be a lot harder to get really fine selections with a mouse than with a stylus and a tablet. It might take a week or two to get used to if you've never worked with one, but you really come up to speed pretty fast, and it's really, really worth it. So I see that it's getting pretty close to the end of an hour, and I believe that that was the time that was going to be allocated for this first session. So I think what I'm going to do is stop at this point, because this was strictly the orientation of getting started using Photoshop, and then I will create a step 2 video to show you a little bit about working with layers and modifying layer content. So I did a little bit of that with the saturation, but let me just do it a little bit more slowly in a second video. And that way, if it needs to be spread out over 2 different sessions, you'll have the content. So I'm going to stop with this right here and see if there are any other questions.